Welcome back to my two-part series where I talk about Flatland, the story it comes from, and the terrible film adaptations that came out of it. Last video we talked about the novella itself, and in this one we're going over those films, the thing that you all have been excited for, waiting for, and telling me in my comments that my opinions are wrong about. But I can assure you, I'm not. If you haven't already watched the previous part where I go over Flatland, the kind of weird hierarchy it has and how it reflects Victorian society and our present-day Western society, then click here. Now that you know more about the book than probably anyone needs to know, let's discuss the films. Or rather, allow me to first outline what I think a good Flatland film would need. I'll be using that criteria to give the existing films and shorts ratings on a scale of 1 to 10. To properly adapt Flatland into a film or other visual medium, we have to first recognize the actual point of the story. A good Flatland adaptation would have to first and foremost describe, either through yucky exposition or character interaction, the society's inherent and extreme misogyny, the class system and shape discrimination, and the way that knowledge is suppressed on all levels of society in some way so the priestly caste can always retain control over their citizens. Only then would the addition of the dimension-hopping A-Square's hunger for knowledge, with it being offered so freely for the first time in his life, and his ultimate imprisonment come into play. The two aspects cannot be separated from one another, as one informs the other. The difficulty of enlightening his world and the sheer unwillingness of its inhabitants to even listen would be difficult to fully comprehend without background on the world and how it works. And the background of the world wouldn't entirely matter were this not a flat world filled with flat minds and an ever-present hierarchy wanting whatever power they can hold over others. Even if that means denying the existence of three-dimensional life outside of their plane. Especially if it means denying it when something as simple as coloring your sides nearly shattered their oppressive caste system. Ultimately, the roles of the third and fourth dimension are that of plot points and mechanisms to further exemplify what we learned earlier on in the exposition segments. We use that information to inform us as to why A-Square's brother would so readily follow orders of imprisonment when seeing something he wasn't supposed to, and why it's so onerous for A-Square himself to truly describe what he saw within the third dimension. Just because you give enlightening information to someone does not mean that they will immediately have the tools to express it, or even be able to unlearn a lifetime's worth of bigotry. It doesn't mean that they'll be able to think outside the boxes that they have been bred to think within. It doesn't mean that they'll be able to explain to the masses why they're circular overlords who have made it to where they will always be above everyone in terms of rightness and smartness because of the laws of regularity that they themselves put into place, would purposefully lie and keep knowledge from those below them. The fact of the matter is that this was a satirical social commentary on Victorian English society, which still has a big influence on our current-day Western society. American, Canadian, British, you name it, societies have been built on the foundation that Edwin Abbott was trying to call attention to being rocky at best. I've pointed out multiple instances of the commentary from this novella lining up damn near directly with the events that we've seen happen in current times, from the fear-mongering and moral panics to the purposeful dulling of people's intellects for the betterment of the government. So while the story, and especially the 2-hour-long film, is used by many math classes to eat up a day towards the end of the school year by saying, it talks about geometry and exponents, so it's mathy. And while it is true that Edwin Abbott was literally a visionary with his description of the third and proposal of the fourth dimensions in the 18th century, the dimensionality isn't actually the main point of the story. The social commentary is. Do any of these films meet my criteria? Well, not in the ways you'd think. And you'd be surprised just how much modern does not mean better. That's all to say, all of these are a bit clown shoes in their own ways, but in my opinion, one is markedly better than the others, and one had the potential to be the perfect Flatland adaptation. Without further ado, let's start chronologically. Flatland, 1965, is a roughly 11-minute short done by the Harvard Carpenter Center for Visual Arts, directed and animated by Eric Martin. According to IMDb, in 1962, John Hubley came to Harvard University as the first teacher of animation in the new Visual Arts Center. It was his idea to make a film based on Edwin Abbott's famous novel, Flatland. 3 years later, the project written by Hubley would come to fruition. This short features a narrator with a horrible Cockney accent that we come to understand is A Square giving an explanation of the world. It's very quick and to the point, and fairly surface level in terms of summarizing the novella's contents. A Square, of course, is still the main character, but the voice acting changes him from a sort of self-righteous, stand-up member of society and proof of his parentage, who hungers for knowledge and is willing to change himself and his beliefs when shown proper evidence, to a cocky and smarmy bloke who's just a real kiss-ass. One who outright insults his grandson Hexagon to his face
Stupid Hexagon
for proposing a third dimension before the sphere's interference, but also sounds like flirty when he's talking to the sphere and apologizing for Hexagon's improper manners.
Have you felt me enough this time?
Oh, she was right. Most illustrious sir.
Sidebar here, the Hexagon grandchild plays a role in all of these films to a different degree, even though he was little more than a throwaway in the novella. This is a change that I think is good, but mostly underutilized, with the potential for the child who incepted the idea of the third dimension on his own to do great things. But we'll actually talk about Hexagon's involvement in later segments. This story features very good animation that at times is trippy, but does a nice job of making Flatland and Spaceland understandable. I do also love how the shapes undulate as if they're living things and not stiff tiles, even if that does go slightly against what is written in the novella for everyone being sharp enough to, at the very least, maim each other. Another thing this short does pretty well is that it's good for showing A Square becoming unhinged and trying to think too far dimensionally. However, it entirely fails to discuss anything of hierarchy, the misogyny and discriminatory nature of Flatlander society, or of the circle's knowledge of the third dimension. All in all, this is a short but relatively true rendition to the book, if not omitting a lot of context and content. For its 11-minute length and the roughly 3 years IMDb seems to imply it took to create with such a small team, I can appreciate it for what it is. We're giving Martin's Flatland 4 wiggling squares out of 10 for its barest of bones adaptation of the novella narrative, with major points deducted for leaving out all political intrigue and commentary on prejudice being bad. Next on the list is Flatlandia, 1982, a roughly 20-minute short film directed by Michele Emmer. This film is made almost entirely using stop motion, which is an incredibly interesting and honestly beneficial choice. Not only is it a very fun way to depict a 2D space, but the ability to use these little acrylic or glass pogs to show exactly what Flatland looks like to the viewer is honestly baller. Like, the side-on view of shapes moving around towards the start of the film really gives the viewer the feeling of having to use sight recognition. Unfortunately, I could not find a translation or subtitled version, and YouTube for some reason wouldn't give me the option to auto-translate the subs, so I can't give a fully informed review. However, context clues and knowing the novella will guide us through. This short starts off with A Square in prison, which is how the novella actually starts, and it's wild that this is the only adaptation to remember this. A circle comes to gloat at A Square about his inability to give a solid definition or show proof of the third dimension. I like that they add a glowing dot to represent the eye of whichever shape is talking. Makes it easy for the viewer to understand, and it also refers back to how the novella states in passing that a shape's eye is a shimmering point in their dimension. The short then seems to give a quick rundown of the world like every other rendition, but using stop motion really does great work to show each aspect of world building. I enjoy the mention of weather, trees, and even house shape. I do like that we see a bit of the caste structure described as characters walk through the streets, but it's a very quick explanation of one of the most crucial aspects of the story. What it lacks in the initial description of caste, though, it makes up for in the fact that it shows the way an isosceles triangle can be reassessed to be equilateral if they start to rebel, and it even shows paints and coloring oneself in a fast way from what I can tell. I do have to wonder if it was a mention of the past massacre or something like that. Again, though, I have no idea other than what's being shown on screen. This might actually be the best adaptation of this novella into film. I know basically what's happening because I know the story already though, so if you don't know the novella well, and you don't know Italian, you're kinda out of luck. I enjoy the way they touch on some political stuff mentioned in the novella no other adaptation does, but it doesn't touch on the horrors of being a woman other than them having a bad temper, it seems. And the section about irregular shapes is similarly short. It shows them imprisoned, but also shows one killing a whole group of people on accident, thus sort of perpetuating an ableist stereotype that, yeah, actually, the disabled should be locked away and have their autonomy taken so they're not a risk to themselves or others. That is the risk that you take when adapting a written story into a sort of PSA-style informational documentary from the looks of it. If you don't show the audience the layers to a situation, like they did well enough in the Isosceles Rebellion scene, then you run the risk of sending the wrong message to your audience. Again though, I can't stress enough, I don't know what the narration is saying, so with that context, the visuals may tell a different story. Additionally, this adaptation doesn't really focus on the whole Apostle of the Third Dimension element or show key moments of sphere enlightening A-square whatsoever. No council room moment, no card stacking or cube feeling, no questioning of the fourth dimension or even dialogue from Sphere from what I can tell. We get dialogue from Hexagon, but that's the only other character we get other than the narrator. Instead, it spends most of its time in the world building stuff just like in the novel itself, but since the whole thing is a commentary on society where the description of the third dimension is a tool for showing just how rigid the world's thinking is, I think it could be elevated with more time dedicated specifically to the Spaceland aspect. It leaves out point and line land too, so points are deducted there as well. As of now though, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I really wish I could rate it higher, but because I literally can't understand it, I can't give more than what I can visually see. Wait, breaking news! I actually got the auto translations to work for Flatlandia! So, for the most part, what I said earlier does still stand. The narration does explain a bit more about the hardships women face, but in a slightly inaccurate way. For example, saying that women are required by law to sway instead of it being only law in some places and otherwise it being an inherent social pressure, while also sort of framing a woman's short temper and irritability as a bit humorous. I might just be reading the tone there wrong though. Granted, there are those stereotypes about Italian women that feed into that kind of joke, so it could also be a cultural thing, I have no clue. Though the short does get bonus points for showing shape sex. I didn't know that's what was going on, but after I can actually read the subtitles, nice. And also, now that I can understand what's going on, a segment that I, on my original watch, couldn't match to an existing story portion turned out to be a short but entirely original segment on dancing and courtship, which is a peculiar choice. It also seems that this film went in the direction of irregular shapes having a slightly higher standing in the world to boot. In the novella, it's noted that irregular shapes are euthanized if their deviation is too great and made into the lowest rank of civil servant if their deformity is within an agreeable level. Though I imagine that to be something like a square with a slightly sharper angle to make it appear a bit more diamond-shaped, or something similar that couldn't just be removed surgically. Not the way this film depicts them with shapes that have large physical differences from a regular polygon being allowed to roam free. However, it's noted that they are criminalized at a much higher rate, with law enforcement just itching for any excuse to kill them in the streets. Unfortunately though, yeah, confirmed, the framing of the film does make it seem like a good thing that irregulars are in prison because they just really do be dangerous. Other than that, the segment on color is very comical with the translation. It goes straight from irregular shapes sure have it tough. They keep killing innocent regular shapes and so rightfully die or are imprisoned. Also, color was a thing people used to do. Anyway, here's why I'm in prison. There's no mention of line land, and Hexagon's question of 3 cubed is wholly ignored. In an interesting twist, the translation has A square refer to sphere as female. The translation hasn't had any issues with pronouns up until this point, but it's entirely a possibility that it's just an error instead of an actual part of the story. However, if it was intended that Sphere in this story is a woman, I like that take, though it makes the fact that she had zero dialogue even more ironic. We don't ever hear Sphere speak during the section where A Square discusses what he learned about the third dimension, and that discussion is just as sparse as it seemed when I couldn't understand anything. There is no characterization of Sphere, and A Square isn't shot down when he mentions the fourth dimension because it's just his sort of raving ideas as he's recounting them. After that, it's sort of an abrupt end, to be honest. So unfortunately, this film gets to keep the initial 6 out of 10 rating, which, spoiler alert, is the highest rating any of these films will get. I really do feel like this film could have done a bit more with more time, but I can also understand that as a piece of entertainment, the majority runtime just being exposition and only like 3 minutes out of 20 being dedicated to the actual plot isn't great as is. Now, we are getting to the adaptations I am sure you as a viewer will be more acquainted with. Flatland 2007, directed by Dano Johnson and Jeffrey Travis, is a 34-minute long, digitally animated short film. I'm choosing to do this 2007 film first because I honestly want to save the nearly 2-hour-long 2007 film for last. That one, I know, came out in January of 2007, but it really deserves to be saved for last. Derogatory. Not gonna lie, I entirely discounted this film back in 2016 when I was obsessed with the novella Flatland. The women are shapes, everyone's a rainbow of colors, there's no way this one is an even passable adaptation. But after watching it, well, let's just say I'm glad I didn't make any bets on hating it. When I was watching all of these films in preparation for this video, I watched this one before the Ladd film and was like, as a standalone movie, this is a solid 7 out of 10 for me. But as a Flatland adaptation, I give it a 3. The problem is that I really do wish I could rate it higher. However, the issues with the film stem from its deviations and core mechanics from the novella that sort of rend its initial statement moot. The story is pretty straightforward. A Square, who is cleverly named Abbott in this rendition, dreams of Lineland. Hexagon proposes the idea of 3 cubed, Sphere appears and shares the gospel of the third dimension with A Square. Abbott asks about the fourth dimension, and Sphere says he cannot confirm its existence. The difference is that instead of being imprisoned at the end, the citizens of Flatland seem ready to accept the idea of the third dimension. Unfortunately, that change sort of makes sense with all the drastic changes made to the world building shown within this short film. For starters, all shapes are colored like the rainbow, and painting isn't even mentioned. They have hats, and the setting is bizarre with fish tanks and water glasses that make no sense because while Flatland might have enough gravity for rain, I doubt the southward draw is strong enough to keep a fish, which is not a regular shape whatsoever, in its bowl. The way everyone acts with their environment also strikes me as them already seeing things from a more top-down perspective than as lines before them. It feels like they're not actually interacting within their environment as their environment would be. The world is also much more advanced with motor vehicles and tasers, which I have to wonder how they would be made in a 2D space and how they would run. You can't mine lithium, the only consistent water is rain, so there's not enough to harness wind, light, water, plasma, etc. Obviously there's no fossil fuels because they can't mine in a world without any real gravity, because in a world without gravity, there's nowhere near enough pressure for sediment to cover decaying beasts. Though, the existence of fucking fish and chicken legs makes me think that there could possibly be rotting dinosaurs and plant matter somewhere. We just have to have, I guess, Flatland dirt? I don't know. Would that just be Flatland dander? Would it be Flatland or dead skin? I don't know. I don't know what it would be, but it makes me think on it too much, more than it really should. The short doesn't really talk about deformity a lot, but it is shown in a fast and poignant way that I appreciate, having a small child carted away from its mother for having a slight angular deviation, saying that they might be killed for it, causing Hexagon to fear that may be what happened to her parents. Remember how Hex is canonically the orphaned grandchild of A Square? I'm amazed that this adaptation is the only one to even slightly take advantage of that open plot point. We do get a point land and line land bit in this one, which is a definite plus. But the writers made circles all knowing about the third dimension and these sort of one-note bad guys whose motivation seems less, we must keep the knowledge suppressed so we keep power overall, and more, we must do evil things because we are evil people. Other than that, shape hierarchy isn't really respected that much. I'll discuss that a bit more in a second because we're down to my two biggest issues with this short. The absolute biggest problem in the whole thing is that there is a physical manifestation of the third dimension that exists within Flatland. Meaning you can literally show everyone that a third dimension exists by just going to this big monolith and seeing it. How convenient! The second biggest issue I have with the story is that, to put it simply, they almost entirely remove the aspects of sexism, prejudice, and discrimination. When I called Hex a she earlier, that wasn't a mistake or me misspeaking. Hexagon is a little girl in this, and while I'm usually one to be very into stories of empowered women and girls, her being a shape just takes a big bit of oomph out of the story. Most issues I have with this film are comparatively small, but when stacked together, they're still fairly detrimental to a Flatland adaptation. In removing women being lines, it also eliminates a few smaller plot elements that I think are important within Flatland, like that they add an additional side to each generation, therein giving a proper explanation as to why a square has a pentagon and so forth. More importantly though, it misses a large point being made within the novella that prejudice in sexism, racism, and even ableism is destructive. And a society built with those things as its backbone will, 1, not be receptive to new knowledge from those outside the class that has thus far made every law and moral and rule, and 2, will not be likely to just up and change their entire society because of one little girl's words. In removing a great deal of the prejudice seen within the universe, it sure removes obstacles and makes it easier for the characters to achieve the goal of spreading the idea of the third dimension to others within the 30-minute runtime, but also eliminates the story's initial message as a social commentary on our real-life society. It makes this uncomfortably relatable fiction into a fairy tale. The way having a female main character could have been amazing if she was a line is something that I'll get into in a second. But for now, I do want to bring into question some character choices made by A Square's wife, especially. Like, girl, you hear your granddaughter expressing illegal sentiments and talking about wanting to know more about the mysterious ruins that the circles have forbidden anyone from going to and seeing. Of course, the best thing to do is give her the convenient research that her dead mother was doing on said ruins. That will surely make her behave better and stop all of this dangerous, rebellious speak. Surely she won't get in trouble with the circles now. On that note, making the circles already know about 3 dimensions past the archives and keeping it secret to control society just to be evil, instead of so that the purposefully dumbed down society won't have a reason to try and rise up, sort of falls flat when there is a physical manifestation of the third dimension in their world that literally anyone can go see. Like, a child literally went there on her scooter. You'd think that these evil overlord circles would have that place guarded, or at the very least would have built a fence. This film feels very sanitized, if I'm being honest. I understand that it was made for a younger demographic, if it winning runner-up for Best Independent Short ages 5 to 12 at the Kids' First Film Festival in 2008 is anything to judge by. But like, you can broach the topics of racism and prejudice and even death in children's media without it being exceedingly graphic. Look at VeggieTales! They had people carted off to Tickle Prison and the Reaper used to— wait a minute. Tickle Prison? Okay, that scares me even more now as an adult. In refusing to have the circles try to take out those who go against them, and in making all shapes functionally equal in social standing from what we see on screen, it eliminates a big reason why it would even make sense for the circles to be in power and for people to listen to them in the first place. Having the circles keeping people subjugated doesn't really do much or have any impact when nobody really seems subjugated to begin with. Girls are bitchy office managers in the workforce and educated. Isosceles triangles, while still acting as oafish goons, don't seem all that oppressed in the film's presentation. There's barely any shapist rhetoric that's paid attention to in the film. The assembly scene has all of the high-class citizens in the back of the room instead of at the front where they would belong as dictated by society. The only real instance of someone expressing their shape and making them better than someone else is when the circle manager woman is spewing a very stereotypical "you lower shapes will never amount to more than your sides," which, that's the whole point of the novella. Why would the circles even care to keep the idea of the third dimension a secret when it doesn't even seem to matter? In the original novella, among other reasons, the circles don't want anyone beneath them to have the impression that there was something above a circle. They are the end-all be-all of everything, thus meaning every ruling they and their ancestors have made is surely right and true. If the general population knew about the existence of the third dimension, and the even more perfect beings outside of it, such as spheres and cubes, who seem to find the law of circles foolish and at times intolerable to their higher existence, it may give their citizens a reason to revolt. It may give the oppressed subhuman triangles a reason to band together. It may give the reactionary and maltreated women a reason to lash out. In this version of Flatland, though, there doesn't really seem to be that weight behind the circle's words. They're just at the top because that's how it is. They're not doing what they think is best for the world and people, or even doing it to keep their people ignorant and beholden to them like in the source material, but instead, just to be an evil monolith that's easy for an audience to jeer at. The same way, Abbott is a very nice man in this, and it's not to say that in the original source material, A Square sucks, but you're not supposed to think he's the best guy in the world, you know? You're supposed to see him as a kind of unreliable narrator. He's not omniscient. But in this, he's just a great guy. He's a great husband, he's a great grandfather. And he seems to have no flaws other than just kind of not trusting Hexagon at the start of the film. To be honest, I truly believe this could have been a pretty great to even amazing film if the story stayed the same and they just kept females as lines who faced prejudice. It would make a breaking of the chain, so to speak. Maybe Hex, though named something else, could have been homeschooled or tutored in private by her grandfather after the death of her parents, with said parents being rebels who wanted to improve society in some way or form, or even unlock the truth of their dimension. Heck, she could have even just been a very observant little girl who taught herself how to do things like sight recognition and mathematics when hearing her grandfather teaching her uncles? I guess. After trying so many times to have a man share the third dimension gospel to Flatland, the one to do it right and convince people is a woman who's seen as subhuman and viewed as a lesser being than even the lowest of the low irregular shapes. That would be in keeping with the novella's themes and an awesome girl power message that you can tell this film was going for. But with all the people being shapes and eliminating a great deal, if not all, of the discrimination that women face, it loses out on a key message from the original social commentary. Okay, but back to having a physical manifestation of the third dimension in Flatland, though, it sort of eliminates one of the biggest reasons why Flatland as a story works and why we feel for the protagonist and how we as humans in a 3D space can relate. The inability to physically show others the dimension higher than your own is the point. Having to convince people with boxed-in minds with words alone that something literally unimaginable is real is the challenge. In this, everyone can just go to the ruins and be like, yep. that sure is a 3D object moving through our plane. And roll credits! Not having that ability mirrors our own inability to demonstrate the fourth dimension. You have to engender a spirit of curiosity and a desire to learn. Otherwise, it's just more marching morons believing only what they see. Otherwise, the story and flow of the film is just okay. Things sort of just click into place and feel rushed at times. We don't have much time to focus on or even get to know Hex as a character, so we don't really care about her. Even though, spoiler alert, she's the apostle chosen one in this adaptation and not A Square as even he thinks he is. This short could have used a little extra time, like maybe even making it a 50 or just 45-minute short instead of being around 30. If we could actually see more of Hexagon's fears of how society treats irregular shapes or her anxiety of her parents' disappearance, more than just, like, a half a minute of content as she spouts governmentally rebellious notions, maybe we could, like, actually get attached to her? While I can appreciate the presence of Lineland being mentioned, I think the film's attempted girls' rule feel would have worked better if the girl was the main character and not her grandfather. It's a nice subversion of expectations though, and it was clear that Hexagon was the real acolyte from the beginning, so I guess it does get points for that. Overall, this is a nice little short film, and I genuinely did enjoy it. It had an okay balance of showing us world lore and giving us story, and nothing felt too drawn out, even if a lot of it did feel rushed. I still give it a 6 on the enjoyment scale, but it gets 3 half-eaten Flatlander chicken legs out of 10 as a novella adaptation. Finally, we've reached the penultimate. Flatland 2007, directed by Ladd Ehlinger, written by Tom Whalen. When it comes to this film, I want to point out that you guys are liars. I almost let you in the YouTube comment section gaslight me into thinking I was too hard on it during my first watch, or was maybe misremembering how bad the film was, but fellas, this movie is absolute dog water. Not just as a Flatland adaptation, but as a film in general. From absolutely off-the-wall characterization of every main character to all-around messy story beats and ugly visuals. Usually I say that there is merit in art being created and all that. If I am expressing my feelings on a game that I didn't enjoy, I usually say, I have XYZ gripes, but I've never made a game before, and I don't think I could do better on my first try. But like, not this time. I do not think either gentleman who created this film will be watching this video essay. However, if they do, I would ask them to either skip to the time on screen or like bite down on some tree bark, because I'm about to be very mean about this movie. Not just as someone who has a degree in filmmaking, but as a general observer as well. Now I say that, but the first comment I have is actually a compliment of the film. Everything was pretty darn good in its first act. We get a character interaction between Hexagon grandson and A Square learning sight recognition with title cards interspersed. The very first thought I had upon my initial 2016 viewing of this film was, wow, I love these visuals. It's like I'm really a being on a higher plane looking down into this dimension, seeing the insides of these second-dimensional characters. It would make a certain amount of sense that they either have no sealed system or that we can see through it since their dimension is only as tall as they are wide. My main issues are not in the core mechanics of Flatland being different. They're actually pretty true to the novella in physiology and stuff, with some very big disparities here and there, though the lack of actual sexism and women being subjugated, thus even having a reason to rebel, is pretty much entirely missing. Especially with how empowered most of the female characters are. Like, again, don't get me wrong, I love a girl boss, but it would be nice to see that the girl bossing isn't the norm before seeing B Square's wife be a badass and kill a bunch of guards later down the line. No, instead, the bonkers story beats they decide to roll with are what ruin the movie for me. As I said, the first 30 minutes of the film do a pretty good job of following the themes of the novella. To a point at least. There's a heavy emphasis on chromatization, which is entirely different in mechanics than the source material, as Flatlanders can innately change their bodies instead of doing it by paints like in the book. We get to actually see some of A Square being a lawyer and visiting a client. However, it's a bit of a mess. Again, it seems like a woman has been chosen as the apostle of the third dimension this time. And she's a line, so that's even better. Even if none of the sexism has really been explained past the peace cry A-Square's wife has to yell, I'm sure we can get some of that in this jail scene, like her talking about being talked down to or demeaned or something. She was imprisoned under false pretenses, so cool. That means we get a crime drama, right? We'll be able to see A-Square at least learn about the third dimension from her first before the sphere comes, right?
My execution!
Oh, wait a minute! No, wait! Guards!
Oh, she killed herself. Okay, film, you know that just adding a title card that says, yes, women can do that doesn't mean it makes sense, right? Detach your mouth and eat yourself to death? What the fuck? It's like the film added this woman for exposition reasons and then didn't know what to do with her or how to otherwise get rid of her for the male lead. So they decided killing her was best, or at the very least, easiest. Anyway, we then see that it looks like instead of having been in the past, the riot and Chromatistes' assassination is happening in the present day, today, when A-Square is out of his house. Yippee! Interesting direction to take, but oh boy, do they just kill off circles who are supposed to be a rare and precious thing in society like nothing. We have another instance of a Flatland adaptation accidentally promoting ableist narratives with the weirdly queer-coded disabled senator Chromatistes.
You can't go on repressing the lesser-sided forever. Color is equality.
Like, I get that this was an attempt to show an irregular circle. Even though we saw the president's dead son who was also irregular at the start, and no way did they look similar, but bro, why did we need such a prolonged assassination scene for this fruity little shape? Also, yeah, they replaced the chief circle with the president, so just keep that in mind. Ultimately, it turned out the president's beliefs were right, and the northern country our Chromatistes stand-in wanted to ally with did want to invade. So it was the politically correct option to get rid of the foolish Chromatistes who wanted to negotiate with them. Whether that would have been imprisonment or this assassination attempt, who knows, but this film entirely ignores the pros of painting yourself as well, vis-a-vis sight recognition becoming easier, only showing it in a negative political light of them being rebels and fools, like a marker for gang members. Aside from the very bad characterization of Sphere, which, oh boy, we'll get into later, the main issues I have with this film are that they made Flatland a physical place that exists within Spaceland instead of it being on its own separate plane or dimension, which implies everyone within Flatland should be affected normally by Spaceland physics and not turn to goo like A-Square starts to. Oh, and the end of that film is just not an ending. You'd think that with this feature-length animation being more kind of true to the novel in makeup, I'd like it more. But no! This film is so much worse than I remember. It added a lot of unnecessary plot points and scenes dragged on for way too long. Like, there's a reason we as filmmakers use tricks like cutaways. We don't need to sit here in silence as Sphere stacks these cards up. Just shot reverse shot that bad boy to A-Square's dumbass face and have it built. Like, I should have had a counter for every time I said, this scene doesn't need to be this long, during my watch through. If I'm feeling it, I'll actually splice it in now.
I don't think this scene needs to be as long as it is. We're at 2 times speed, why is this so long? This sequence doesn't need to be as long as it is. I'm getting motion sick.
It hurts my brain. I'm sure it does.
My brain's hurting too. The scene, okay. This feels like the opening to a Miku Miku dance. It feels just like things happening for no reason. Also, why is this fucking segment so long? We're at 2 times speed. We didn't need this part of it. Just let me die at this point.
I know I'm harping on it, but there were just so many drawn-out times where nothing is happening to move the story along that we could have just cut out or used to maybe, like a life vest, characterized these protagonists to be at all likable? Maybe to have a single redeeming quality? Additionally, the story sort of just forgets characters and plot points that were built up in the first third of the film, like the president. What was up with the trapezoid who showed up twice and died twice? Why did the woman get visions of Spaceland in her dreams? Why and how did she eat herself? What were the light points? points. Unless we're to assume that it's the fucking nuclear war going on in Spaceland. We'll get into that. That's just destroying everything. Who is popping random people out of Flatland at the end? What was with Sphere's flying car gaining sentience at the end there and acting heartbroken that he was dead and trying to kill A Square in yet another scene that dragged on for far too long? Some things are set up as a MacGuffin. You know, something that seems like an important end goal plot point that moves the story forward but ultimately doesn't matter. But these were not that. They were not built up as big things or as thematic heel turns, but were just short little plot points added for convenience, a laugh, and were summarily discarded and not addressed or explained once they fulfilled their narrative purpose. And the things that were built up in multiple scenes, such as the light points, just went nowhere. They had no purpose. They had no reason other than just, yeah, this is a thing. Okay.
It also has an issue with shape hierarchy. That square would never have been a merchant.
That would have been an equilateral triangle. Plebeian idiot. Then we get to the film's tone, which is just all over the place. Plucky music plays during literal massacres.
He had children. He was more than a soldier. He may not have been a big important man, but he was worth something. He was practically my brother.
What the fuck is this music that's happening right now? I'm sorry.
Fun bohemian music plays while doing what I can only assume is meant to be the character establishing scene of A Sphere as he kills not only a bus full of people he was throwing money to and who were actually excited to see him, but also all of the protesters outside his building as well. Like, no wonder the government stepped in. What even is Messiah Incorporated? Why does it exist? Spaceland seems to have a similar caste system to Flatland, with everyone adoring A Sphere because he's a sphere. But he has zero redeeming qualities as a person. Actually, none of the characters in this film are even remotely likable aside from the wives with barely any screen time. Hex is an annoying little shit who I wanted to get maimed. A Square was like an everyman, and so just a neutral viewer insert, so to speak, except, oh, he's a thief who stole a narratively worthless light point from a dead salesman, and even for a microorganism with little structure to begin with, he's a spineless, simpering little trog. The president is like any stereotypical dickhead in a position of power in a film, yet it feels like the creators put all of their love into writing and making him sympathetic for some reason. And as I said, A Sphere just fucking sucks. He's not even fun chaotic like Warden from Super Jail, or evil and menacing like Professor Venomous, or a wimpy, omniscient force like Wheatley from Portal, or even charismatic and smarmy like Hannibal fucking Lecter. He just seems like a douche. This is where you sort of fall flat on the whole, we're making this Victorian satirical commentary into a present-day USA one. They made everything government and capitalism bad, not just Flatland being the bad place and having the higher plane of existence be slightly above that, like in the novella, and even in the other adaptations. This made the Mentor just as bad, if not worse, than the Circles in power. Everything about this setup makes me wonder why they even want to enlighten Flatland with the gospel of the third dimension. Like, in the novella, and even the other 2007 film, it feels like whatever force from Spaceland is in charge of Sphere genuinely wants to enlighten Flatlanders because of a true desire to spread knowledge. But this one leaves me wondering what A Sphere and Messiah Inc. get out of it. What profit is there in keeping Flatland around and not just nuking it like is implied at the end of this film? Why bother wasting the money, time, and resources to choose an apostle every 1,000 years? Because with the way he's characterized, it surely is not because Sphere wants to enlighten others out of the goodness of his heart. I doubt there even is any goodness in his heart. It feels like the first 30 minutes of this film were written by a completely different person than the last hour. And I much prefer that hypothetical first writer. So many things feel like they happen just because and for no reason, such as the woman eating herself. No, I will not get over that. Don't get me started on the terrible cinematography in the 3D world that left me actually nauseous. Like, Am I watching Cocomelon? Is that why everything is max saturation and constantly moving? The only good visuals in Spaceland were the pop-ups in the background as Sphere and A-Square spoke, starting to discuss the scandal of bringing a Flatlander out of his dimension. But da-das, even that was nigh incomprehensible due to the world being such a trippy eye-fucking that you can barely tell what's there as a funny haha Easter egg and what's there for actual plot, assuming you can even actually see it with the soupy way everything constantly moves about. Both this film and the other 2007 short end with a weird Deus Ex Machina moment of the protagonist getting rescued, or at the very least yoinked out from their world by someone on a higher dimension. But the end of this one just blows. It felt rushed and simultaneously dragged on forever. Far too much was introduced in the last 15 minutes of the film between A-Square's trial that added nothing to the story, the ensuing war, the strange love-struck flying car, and the way the final in-Flatland war wrapped up. Or, more specifically, didn't wrap up. The end makes no sense and cuts off so abruptly with no payoff. The environment of Flatland disappears piece by piece as the rainbow-colored northern country invades, with A-Square ultimately seeming to die as he pitifully mumbles about needing to meet his wife at the border. It feels like AI wrote the end, but this was done in 2007, so it's more likely a chimpanzee on a typewriter did it. Maybe it's meant to be a subversion of controversial film tropes. Maybe it's just a final act writing fatigue. Literally, this film gave me a migraine after watching it. Ultimately, the movie feels uncomfortable. Camp, but very much unintentionally so, and only some of the time. If you think this movie is objectively good past the first 30 minutes, I don't know, I don't usually yuck other people's yums, but this thing is more than a bit of a mess. There is merit in the fact that something sure was made, but hot damn. There is a triangle of creation in business. You know, you can only have something done cheap, well, or fast, and you can only choose two. There's a similar concept in filmmaking. A film can have good story, good sound, and good visuals. Most films considered pretty good have two from that list, and great films have all three. This film, however, in my personal and professional opinion, has none. Past a certain point, this film looks ugly, sounds bad music and sound effects wise, and it has a very messy plot and massive third act hang-ups. While I could propose a way the other 2007 film could be improved upon, I don't really know how to even try with this one without just starting from scratch. This film gets 1.5 vivisected pieces of Senator Chromatistes out of 10. The novella has strong messages that prejudice is bad, baked into the protagonist praising and reciting his world's makeup. But that point just goes over the heads of every film adaptation that I've seen so far, in different ways to varying degrees. It exchanged them for messages of be yourself and adventure, or get your mind broken by staring into the eye of Cthulhu and devolve into a simpering mess while your country burns around you? Which, sure, accurate to what would actually happen, but it wasn't executed well, and neither are a good exchange for what the initial social commentary was trying to do. Neither makes a good adaptation of the source material. They're just inspired by it and take story beats from it. In the end, there are elements from all of these adaptations that I enjoyed. Sphere's attitude from the Johnson and Travis short film is great. The authenticity of Flatland as a setting in the Ladd adaptation is awesome. The funkadelic vibes of the very first short are a delight, and the dedication to story authenticity in the Italian film is the best. At the end of the day, no matter what your favorite of the four is, your tastes are your own. And I am a simple idiot online with a silly little film degree. My opinions expressed here are just a mix of my knowledge in writing a screenplay, editing for the director, and my personal feelings. The strongest of which being the fucking Italian film from the 80s is still the best adaptation of Flatland that you can find. What do you think though? Have you watched any of these? And what did you think of them if so? Thank you for getting to the end of this video. I don't know how long it's gonna be at this point, but I'm sure it's gonna be at least around 2 hours, good lord. But hey, it's no worse than the fucking Ladd film that is just 2 hours of nothing. Okay, I gotta stop harping on it. Thank you very much, as always, to my Wondabulicious Patreon supporters. I could not make this content without you guys. This script took so long to make. It was so labor intensive. And dead ass. If I did not have the Patreon support for literally just not making videos for almost an entire month while trying to put this together, I wouldn't have been able to do it at all. So thank you. At our brother, sibling, sister tier, we have Miss Mercuriel, Ash Valentine, Bucks Kit, and Viri. At our mommies, daddies, and guardians tier, we have Kai and Mary. And at our gods, goddesses, and deities tier, we have gods and punks and Agent Ness. Thank you guys so much for all the support. I appreciate it, munches and bunches. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And I will see you guys in the next video. I really hope that this gets more than 200 views. I worked so hard on it. Oh my god. Okay. I love you. I will talk to you later. My voice is fried. Bye-bye. Sorry, someone wrote. I just got an email notification saying that someone put a note on one of my fan fictions that says, "I'm tearing chunks out of my walls right now. I need him so bad."